Hello, Sherwood Forest. I'm Michael, and I'll be reading you Chapter 12 of the Neverending Story. Chapter 12, The Old Man of Wandering Mountain. On thundering avalanches descended from the heights. Snowstorms raged between towering ice-coated summits, dipped into hollows and ravines, and swept howling onward over the great wide expanse of the glaciers. Such weather was not at all unusual for this part of the country, for the Mountain of Destiny, that was its name, was the highest in all of Fantastica, and its peaks literally jutted into the heights of heaven. Not even the most intrepid mountain climbers ventured into these fields of everlasting ice. It had been so very, very long since anyone had succeeded in climbing this mountain that feat had been forgotten. For one of Fantastica's many strange laws decreed that no one could climb the Mountain of Destiny until the last successful climber had been utterly forgotten. Thus, anyone who managed to climb it would always be the first. No living creature could survive in that icy waste except for a handful of gigantic ice clumps, who could barely be called living creatures, for they moved so slowly that they needed years for a single step and whole centuries for a short walk. Which meant, of course, that they could only associate with their own kind and knew nothing at all about the rest of Fantastica. They thought of themselves as the only living creatures in the universe. Consequently, they were puzzled to the point of consternation when they saw a tiny speck twining its way upward over perilous crags and razor-sharp ridges, then vanish into deep chasms and crevices, only to reappear higher up. That speck was the childlike Empress's glass slitter, still carried by 4 of the invisible powers. It was barely visible, for the glass it was made of looked very much like ice, and the childlike Empress's white gown and white hair could hardly be distinguished from the snow roundabout. She had traveled many days and nights, the 4 powers that carried her through blinding rain and scorching sun, through darkness and moonlight, onward and onward, just as she had ordered, no matter where. She was prepared for a long journey and all manner of hardship, since she knew that the Old Man of Wandering Mountain could be everywhere or nowhere. Still, the 4 invisible powers were not guided entirely by chance in their choice of an itinerary. As often as not, the nothing, which had already been swallowed up by whole regions, left only a single path open. Sometimes the possibilities narrowed, down to a bridge, a tunnel, or a gateway. And sometimes they were forced to carry the litter with the deathly ill Empress over the waves of the sea. These carriers saw no difference between liquid and solid. Tireless and persevering, they had finally reached the frozen heights of the Mountain Destiny, and they would go on climbing until the childlike Empress gave them another order. But she lay still on her cushions. Her eyes were closed, and she said nothing. The last words she had spoken were the "no matter where" she had said on leaving the ivory tower. The litter was moving through a deep ravine so narrow that there was barely room for it to pass. The snow was several feet deep, but the invisible carriers did not sink in or even leave footprints. It was very... Sorry, I lost them. The litter was moving through the deep ravine so narrow that there was barely room to pass. The snow was several feet deep, but the invisible carriers did not sink in or even leave footprints. It was very dark at the bottom of this ravine, which admitted only a narrow strip of daylight. The path was on a steady incline, and the higher up the litter climbed, the nearer the daylight seemed. And then suddenly the walls leveled off, opening up a view of a vast, wide expanse. This was the summit, for the Mountain of Destiny culminated not, like most other mountains, in a single peak, but in this high plateau, which is as large as a whole country. But then, surprisingly enough, a smaller, odd-looking mountain arose in the midst of the plateau. It was rather tall and narrow, something like the ivory tower, but glittering blue. It consisted of innumerable strangely shaped stone teeth, which jutted into the sky like great inverted icicles. And about halfway up the mountain, Three such teeth supported an egg the size of a house. Behind the egg, large blue columns, resembling the pipes of an enormous organ, rose in a semicircle. The great egg had a circular opening, which might have been a door or a window. And in that opening, a face appeared. The face was looking straight at the litter. The childlike empress opened her eyes. "Stop," she said softly. The invisible power stopped. The childlike empress sat up. It's the old man of Wandering Mountain," she said. "I must go the last stretch of the way alone. Whatever may happen, wait here for me." The face in the circular open vanished. The childlike empress stepped out of the litter and started across the great snowfield. It was hard going, for she was barefooted, and there was an icy crust on the snow. At every step she broke through, and the ice cut her tender feet. The wind tugged at her white hair and her gown. At last she came to the Blue Mountain and stood facing the smooth stone teeth. The dark circular opening disgorged a long ladder, much longer than there could possibly have been room for in the egg. It soon extended to the foot of the Blue Mountain, and when the childlike empress took hold of it, she saw that it consisted of letters, which were fastened together. Each rung of the ladder was a line. The childlike empress started climbing. As she climbed from rung to rung, she read the words. Turn back and go away. For come what will and come what may, never in any time or place must you and I meet face to face. To you alone, O childlike one, the way is barred, to you alone. Turn back, for never shall beginning seek the end of all. The consequence of your intrusion can only be extreme confusion. Ha ha ha. She stopped to rest and looked up. She still had a long way to go. So far, she hadn't gone halfway. Old man of Wandering Mountain, she said aloud. If you don't want us to meet, you needn't have written me this letter. It's this invitation that brings me. And she went on climbing. What you achieve and what you are is recorded by me, the chronicler. Letters unchangeable and dead freeze at what the living did and said. Therefore, by coming here to me, you invite catastrophe. This is the end of what you once began. You will never be old, and I, old man, was never young. What you awaken, I lay to rest. Be not mistaken. It is forbidden that life should see itself in dead eternity. Again, she had to stop and catch her breath. By then, the childlike empress was high up, and the ladder was swaying like a branch in the snowstorm. Clinging to the icy letters that formed the rungs of the ladder, she climbed the rest of the way. But if you still refuse to heed the warning of the ladder's screed, if you are still prepared to do what in time and space is forbidden you, I won't attempt to hold you back. Then welcome to the old man's shack. Ha 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 ha. When the childlike empress said those last rungs behind her, she sighed and looked down. Her white gown was in tatters. Fur had caught on every bend and crossbar of the message ladder. Oh well, she had known all along that letters were hostile to her. She felt the same way about them. From the ladder, she stepped through the circular opening in the egg. Instantly, it closed behind her, and she stood motionless in the darkness, waiting to see what would happen next. Nothing at all happened for quite some time, actually. At length, she said softly, "Here I am." Her voice echoed as in a large empty room, or was it another, much deeper voice that had answered her in the same words? Little by little, she made out a faint reddish glow in the darkness. It came from an open book, which hovered in midair at the center of the egg-shaped rooms. It was tilted in such a way that she could see the binding, which was of copper-colored silk, and on the binding as on the gem, which the childlike empress wore around her neck. She saw an oval formed by two snakes biting each other's tail. Inside this oval was printed the title, The Neverending Story. Bastian's thoughts were in a whirl. This was the very same book that he was reading? He looked again. Yes, no doubt about it. It was the book he had in his hand. How could this book exist inside itself? The childlike empress had come closer. On the other side of the hovering book, she now saw a man's face. It was bathed in a bluish light. The light came from the print of the book, which was bluish green. The man's face was as deeply furrowed as if it had been carved from the bark of an ancient tree. Excuse me. His beard was long and white, and his eyes were so deep in their sockets that she could not see them. He was wearing a dark monk's robe with a hood, and in his hand he was holding a stylus, with which he was writing in the book. He did not look up. The childlike emperor stood watching him in silence. He was not really writing. His stylus glided slowly over the empty page, and the letters, stylus glided slowly over the empty page, and the letters and words appeared as though of their own accord. The childlike empress read what was being written, and it was exactly what was happening at that same moment. The childlike empress read what was being written. You wrote down everything that happens, she said. Everything that I write down happens, was the answer. Spoken in a deep, dark voice that had come to her like an echo of her own voice. Strange to say, the old man of Wandering Mountain had not opened his mouth. He had written her words, and she had not heard him as though merely remembering that he just spoken. Are you and I in all Fantastica? She asked. Are we all recorded in this book? He wrote. At the same time, she heard his answer. No, you've got it wrong. This book is all Fantastica, and you and I. But where's the book? And he read the answer. In the book. Then it's all a reflection of a reflection, she asked. He wrote, in terms say, what does one see in a mirror reflected in a mirror? Do you know that, golden-eyed commander of wishes? The childlike empress said nothing for a while, and the old man wrote that she said nothing. Then she said softly, I need your help. I knew it, he said and wrote. Yes, she said. I supposed you would. You are fantastic as memory. You know everything that's happened up to this moment, but couldn't you leaf ahead in your book and see what's going to happen? Empty pages, was the answer. I can only look back at what has happened. I was able to read it while I was writing, and I know it because I have read it, and I wrote it because it happened. Never-ending story writes itself by hand. Then you don't know why I've come to you? No. And as he was writing, she heard the dark voice. And I wish you hadn't. By my hand, everything becomes fixed and final, you too. Golden-eyed commander of wishes. This egg is your grave in your coffin. You have entered into the memory of Fantastica. How do you expect to leave here? Every egg, she said, is the beginning of new life. True, the old man wrote and said, but only if its shell bursts open. You can't open it, cried the childlike empress. You let me in. Your power lets you in. But now that you're here, your power is gone. We are shut up here for all time. Truly, you shouldn't have come. This is the end of the never-ending story. The childlike empress smiled. She didn't seem troubled in the least. You and I, she said, can't prolong it. There is someone who can. Only a human, wrote the old man, can make a fresh start. Yes, she replied, a human. Slowly, the old man of Wandering Mountain raised his eyes and saw the childlike empress for the first time. His gaze seemed to come from the darkest distance, from the end of the universe. She stood up to it, answered it with her golden eyes. A silent, immobile battle was fought between them. At length, the old man bent over his book and wrote, For you too there is a borderline. Respect it. I will, she said. But the ones of whom I speak, the one for whom I am waiting, crossed it a long time ago. He is reading this book while you are writing it. He hears every word you're saying. He is with us. That is true, she heard the old man's voice as he was writing. He too is part and parcel of the never-ending story, for it is his own story. Tell me the story, the childlike empress commanded. You, who are the memory fantastica, tell me the story from the beginning, word for word, as you have written it. The old man's writing hand began to tremble. If I do that, I shall have to write everything all over again. And so what what I write will happen again. So be it, said the childlike empress. Bastian was beginning to feel uncomfortable. What was she going to do? It had something to do with him. But if even the old man of Wandering Mountain was trembling, the old man wrote and said, if the never-ending story contains itself, the world will end with this book. And the childlike empress answered, well, if the hero comes to us, new life can be born. Now the decision is up to him. You are ruthless indeed, the old man said and wrote. We shall enter the circle of eternal return, from which there is no escape. Not for us, she replied, and her voice was no longer gentle, but as hard and clear as a diamond, not for him, unless he saves us all. Do you really want to entrust everything to a human? I do. But then she added more softly, or have you a better idea? After a long silence, the old man's dark voice said, no. He bent low over the book in which he was writing. His face was hidden by his hood. Then do what I ask. Submitting to her will, the old man of Wandering Mountain began telling the never-ending story from the beginning. At that moment, the light cast by the pages of the book changed color. It became reddish like the letters that now formed under the old man's stylus. His monk's habit and the hood also took on the color of copper, and as he wrote, his deep, dark voice resounded. Bastian too heard it quite clearly, yet he did not understand the first words the old man said. They sounded like Scoob-Doo-Loo, Red-Narak, Danak-Larak. Strange, Bastian thought. Why is the old man suddenly talking a foreign language? Or was it some sort of magic spell? The old man's voice went on, and Bastian couldn't help listening. This inscription could be seen in the last door of a small shop, but naturally this was only the way it looked for if you were inside a dimly lit shop, looking out of the street through the plate glass door. Outside it was a gray, cold, rainy November morning. The rain ran down the glass and over the ornate letters. Through the glass there was nothing to be seen but the rain splotched a wall across the street. Bastian was rather disappointed. I don't know that story, he thought. It's not in the book I've been reading. Oh well, it only goes to show that I've been mistaken the whole time. I really thought the old man would start telling the never-ending story from the beginning. Suddenly the door was opened so violently that a little cluster of brass bells tinkled wildly, taking quite some time to calm down. The cause of this hubbub was a fat little boy of 10 or 12. His wet, dark brown hair hung down over his face. His coat was soaked and dripping, and he was carrying a school satchel slung over his shoulder. He was rather pale and out of breath, but despite the hurry he had been in a moment before, he was standing in the open doorway as though rooted to the spot. As Bastian read this and listened to the deep, dark voice of the old man of Wandering Mountain, a whirring started up in his tears, and he saw spots before his eyes. Why was this all about him? And it was a never-ending story. He, Bastian, was a character in the book which until now he had thought he was reading. And heaven only knew who else might be reading it at the same exact time, also supposing himself to be just a reader. And now Bastian was afraid. He felt unable to breathe, as though shut up in an invisible prison. He didn't want to read anymore. He wanted to stop. But the deep, dark voice of the old man of Wandering Mountain went on, and there was nothing Bastian could do about it. He held his hands over his ears, but it was no use, because the voice came from inside him. He tried desperately to tell himself, though he knew it wasn't true, that the resemblance of his own story was some crazy accident. But the deep, dark voice went on. And ever so clearly, he heard it saying, "Where are your manners? If you had any, you would have introduced yourself." "My name is Bastian," said the boy. "Bastian Balthazar Bucks." In that moment, Bastian made a profound discovery. You wish for something, you've wanted it for years, and you're sure you want it, as long as you know you can't have it. But if all at once it looks as though your wish might come true, you suddenly find yourself wishing you had never wished for any such thing. That is exactly how it was with Bastian. Now that he was in danger of getting his wish, he would have liked best to run away. But since you can't run away unless you have some idea where you're at, Bastian did everything perfectly absurd. He turned it over on his book like a beetle and played dead. He made himself as small as possible and pretended he wasn't there. The old man of Wandering Mountain went on telling and writing the story of how Bastian had stolen the book, how he had fled to the schoolhouse attic and had begun to read. And then Atreyu's quest began all over again. He spoke with Morla at age 1 and found Falcor and Igramul's nest beside the deep chasm, and heard Bastian's cry of fear. Once again, he was cured by old Urgel and lectured by Ingiwook. He passed through the 3 magic gates, entered into Bastian's image, and spoke with Eulalia. And then came the Wind Giants and Spook City and Gamork, followed by Atreyu's rescue and the flight to the Ivory Tower. And in between everything that Bastian had done, how it had lit the candles, how he had seen the childlike Empress, and how she had waited for him in vain, once again she started her own way to find the old man of Wandering Mountain. Once again she climbed the ladder of letters and entered the pig. Once again the conversation between her and the old man was related word for word. And once again the old man of Wandering Mountain began to write and tell the never-ending story. And at that point, the story began all over again, unchanged and unchangeable. And once again with the meeting between the childlike Empress and the old man of Wandering Mountain, who began once again to write and tell the never-ending story. And so it would go on forever and ever, for any change in the sequence of events was unthinkable. Only he, Bastian, could do anything about it, and he would have to do something, or else he too would be included in the circle. It seemed to him that the story had been repeated 1,000 times, as though there were no before and after, and everything had happened at once. Now he realized why the old man's hand trembled. The circle of eternal return was an end without an end. Bastian was so unaware of the tears that were running down his cheeks. Close to fainting, he suddenly cried out, "Moonchild, I'm coming!" In that moment, several things happened at once. The shell of the great egg was dashed to pieces by some overwhelming power. A rumbling of thunder was heard, and then the storm wind came roaring afar. It blew from the pages of the book that Bastian was holding on his knees, and the pages began to flutter wildly. Bastian felt the wind in his hair and face. He would scarcely breathe. The candle flames in the 7-armed candelabrum danced, wavered, and lay flat. Then another, still more violent wind blew into the book, and the candles went out. The clock in the belfry struck 12. That was the end of chapter 12. I really hope you enjoyed that chapter, and I hope you tune in for chapter 13 tomorrow night. Have a good night, Sherwood Forest.